Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to do this middle grade debut chat or debut panel. It is the first ever this year, but also like ever for me at least. So this has been my favorite like 2023 kickoff or whatever you want to call it, like new project. So thank you everyone for joining. Also, thank you to the authors for coming and chatting and like kicking off this new series together. Um, just a little bit about me, and then all the authors will give intros about themselves, and they'll also tell us about their books, obviously. So if you didn't know who I am, my name is Lily. I'm the moderator for the panel, and I'm the face behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet. So I will start off the author intros with Sydney, and then we will chat after that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Dunlap. I've got my book that just came out at the end of February. It's called It Happened on Saturday. And I am a longtime elementary school teacher, and I've worked with at-risk kids for a while too. And I'll be talking later on about how those things combined and went together into driving me into writing my book.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Huntoon, and my book, Skating on Mars, comes out on Tuesday. So this is exciting that I get to hold it in my hands. It is about a non-binary figure skater who is very competitive and is looking for a space to compete and beat all the people that they don't really care for. So more about my book soon. I'm a teacher in Michigan, and I write middle grade, mainly contemporary, but I am dabbling in other genres as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ronnie Riley, and I wrote Jude Saves the World. It came out on April 18th. It's about a non-binary kid who creates a safe space at their local library, befriends the ex-Popular Girl, and comes out to their grandparents.
I also do want to mention that we will be taking audience questions if you have any, so definitely put them in the chat and I will try to get back to them. So first off, we're going to start off with my questions. And the first one that I have to ask is in a kind of a general question about, the theme of middle grade debuts, but what brings you to the middle grade age group? Why write for middle grade readers? And do you remember the first book you read as a middle grade reader? So Sydney, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So, as I said, I was a teacher for a long time. And so I think I've been immersed in elementary school age reading, middle school age reading. And I would say that the reason I wrote this book was because of some work I have done with child trafficking survivors, and my realization that there was really nothing for kids of this age on this topic, and I thought it was a very important topic that children become aware of. So as far as the middle grade age, I remember reading the Ramona books when I was a child, and I remember that as just being what hooked me into reading, because I was sitting in my classroom during sustained silent reading time, and I just could not put the book down, and I had to, and I just couldn't wait till I could get home and finish reading. And I think that's when I actually had this little thought, I think I might want to do this one day. And it was much later that I decided to, but I remember having that little spark way back when I was 9.
I remember my dad reading me those books, and the part where Ramona is riding around in the bunny ears and on their tricycle and playing the harmonica. So I have this very specific image of my dad just being like, while he's reading this book to me. So yes, I think though I didn't really know what middle grade as a space was as a young reader. And, you sort of transition through, now as an adult, I can see it. And I have my own child where I'm like, oh, there's picture books, and then there's early reader chapter books. And then you sort of move into this intermediate area, and then middle grade, and then YA. But when I started writing, I was like, oh, I guess I write YA because I write like longer books for younger than adult people. So but I really was writing middle grade stories when I started writing. I just didn't quite have the language to understand that was a category. So I'm really excited actually to be here with other middle grade authors, but also just to sort of expand general knowledge about what middle grade is and that it exists. And then I will say, like, looking back, I think like the middle grade book that I'm like, oh yeah, I like read this book into a pulp. Like the spine is broken, the cover was Ella Enchanted, which I just read so many times. But now I'm like, oh, that was a middle grade. Oh, okay, now I see it.
For me, I would say I actually don't remember what middle grade book when I was in middle grade age, because I read so many books and I would just go through them so quickly. But I would say that writing middle grade, kind of the age group for me, came from like an apology. Like I always say that Jude Saves the World is an apology to my younger self, for not having the language that I had when I was younger. And so I kind of read a couple middle grade books and then thought, like, maybe I could do this. And then I started to devour middle grade books. And I find that they touch on so many important topics. And I really love that they give kids access to language and experiences that they might not otherwise have.
Yeah, I think that everyone has brought up such really interesting points. Yeah, about not. Yeah, when you're growing up, not in the book community, right? Like the publishing community. Yeah, the distinguishing line between all of these genres and age groups and whatever, it feels very nebulous. And I think that I also don't really remember when I first started reading, but middle grade. But I'm glad that you mentioned Ella Enchanted, because I legitimately, when everyone was answering this question, was like, did I read middle grade at all? Like, what? And then you mentioned Ella Enchanted. I was like, oh yes, I get it now. Like that, yeah, that is what I read.
Well, and even in bookstores, there's very clearly like a YA section in the bookstore, but if you go into the children's section, there's sometimes early readers, there's sometimes intermediate is the label. So, and I think certainly as a young person, I was like, not like which level, you get enough of that in your life. Like, I was like, I just like stories about fill in the blank.
Yeah, it can be really confusing, I feel like, as a younger reader as well. Um, One of the things I wanted to talk about as well, talking about a little bit more about the debut side and not the middle grade side, is your journey to publication, and also for Sydney and Ronnie, how it's been post publication, and also for Caroline, if you have any thoughts on the last few days before publication. But yeah, Caroline, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll be listening carefully to everyone else's answers so I can like get some tips for the next couple weeks. Sort of the road to publication for me, looking back, and it's funny to say like it was breakneck speed, but now that I know more about publishing, Skating on Mars went from like concept to printed book as fast as I think books can be made without, I'm not like a celebrity. I don't have like the cachet of like, we need to get this issue book out right now. But I wrote it in the fall of 2020. I got my agent in the winter of 2020. I signed my book deal in the spring of 2021, went through edits, all of that. And here we are in 2023. And I think, there's so much you learn in that time, from having conversations with people. And I'll be interested to see if there are questions in the chat, because everyone will like ask me a question like, oh, when did you write your book? And I'm like, oh, I wrote it in 2020. And they're like, wow, that's a long time ago. I'm like, unfortunately, it really isn't. But I also think like there's so much about publishing, even if you're in the industry, that feels like opaque and you don't really know what's going on. And why do I have to get it off to the printer so early? And, you learn as you go along and you pick up oh, well, actually, it does take that long to get something printed and make sure that everything is right with it. And um, distribution takes, all these things. So I think the other thing for me is um, I'm still kind of waiting for it to be real that I'm having a book that comes out in like 4 days. I think getting the box of books helped, but I'm a theater person. That's what I did growing up. So I'm really used to my creative pursuits having this very definitive, like, we're all going to watch together and we're all going to respond like in the moment with applause. And that's just not how books work. So I am sort of trying to come in with an open heart to this like slow roll that is publishing. And I'm going to listen carefully to Ronnie and Sydney to see what I should keep in mind as I move past Tuesday.
So my journey for publication was kind of similar to Caroline's. Basically, I wrote Jude Saves the World in June of 2020. I submitted it to agents and signed at the end of December of 2020. And then I think I signed my contract in 2021. It's a little hazy because it just took a really long time. And yeah, so when it comes to post-publication, I think the moment that it felt a little real to me is I had a mother reach out to me saying that her trans son had read Jude Saves the World and wanted her to read it, and then they gave it to his grandmother to read, and I was like, oh, like this is actually in the hands of a kid now, like. And then a classroom is reading Jude Saves the World, and that was just like mind-blowing to me. I was like, oh, like kids are actually reading it. And I think that's the moment it kind of became a little more real to me, because even when I officially, it was released into the world, it still kind of felt like I hadn't released a book into the world. But now I think it's starting to become more real. And yeah, it's been great. It's been a little roller coaster with emotions, just kind of, it's a little quiet some days, and some days you get a bunch of messages or like people, reading it and stuff. So yeah, I think it's going well though.
So I realize that there's interesting when you're both saying that you started in 2020. I'm impressed and amazed. Mine took longer for sure. I think I really had the idea and started working on mine in late 2017, like the end of that year. But it wasn't till I'd say very late in 2018 that it was really done. And that's actually, I was fortunate. I met my agent at an SCBWI event in person and had the opportunity to pitch the idea to her, and she wanted to see it. So I was spared the querying that I know can be so hard when you have to research people and send them letters and do all of that. It felt just serendipitous to me that I went to this event and she was the speaker, and it was just really cool because I think the story connected with her, and we ended up being a really good match. So I felt very lucky not to have to do all of that, because I know that process can be really hard and stressful and take a long time. So then I guess I signed my contract with my publisher in early 2022. So just a little bit of a year out from when it was published. And I'd say it's been really amazing. The last couple of months, I guess, well, it's a little over 3 months now, I would say have felt a little surreal. There's time that it's just so busy, and then time where it's, like Ronnie was saying, days that are a little quieter, and then there's those days that are just nonstop. I have been traveling a lot, and that's something that I don't normally do. Um, I tutor kids. I've been tutoring kids for a long time and writing and kind of combining the two. And so I'm still tutoring my students when I'm home, but then I've been on the road quite a bit doing school visits and bookstore visits. And I actually just got back from an event in Virginia late last night. So I'm a little sleepy, so I do apologize. But it's been really fun and really surreal. And I think it's talking to kids who have read the book that made it start to feel real for me as well. I was at a school in California that is a private school that's not that big, and they were able to have the book circulate. I think they had like 20 copies and maybe 60 kids or something in the middle school age that had all read the book before I visited. And so it was really just having the kids talking about, well, Julia and Nori, and talking about the characters like they're real people. And when this, and this happened in the story, and asking me questions from the point of view of someone who really knows my characters well, and knows everything that happened. It was really, really fun. And I think that's when it really dawned on me that, oh my gosh, this is actually a book that kids are reading and that is in the world. Because I think one thing that surprised me, Carolyn, you were talking about how long the process takes, right? At the printer and all those other things. And, we realize as we go through it, there's so many steps. Like, I had never heard of NetGalley before. I didn't know what that was. And then suddenly I'm all about NetGalley. Oh, my book's on NetGalley. Oh, is anybody reading it? And it becomes this huge thing that was just something that was not a word in your vocabulary a week before that. And suddenly it's like, check in NetGalley to see what's going on there. So one surprise that I had was all the adults that read your book before they actually get to your targeted reader, because I knew that books would get reviewed, and I knew that was part of the process, but I didn't realize it was going to have all of these, people that were going to be talking about it on, on NetGalley or on Goodreads or wherever. And it was going to be a while before it actually got to the kids. So I think for me, having it in the hands of those kids is my favorite part. I love it. Getting to talk to them about it.
I want to ask a few questions that are in depth about all of your books. So I want to start off with For It Happened on Saturday. And I think that your story has a lot of potential to be important questions for middle grade readers, specifically about like internet safety and about, strangers and all of those kinds of conversations. So I was wondering if you could go a little bit more in depth about what inspired that story concept for you, and also reception specifically related to that post publication.
Absolutely. And I do realize, as I said, I got in really late last night from a flight. I didn't really give my little quick summary of my story. I think I just introduced myself. So I'm going to give that now, just so everyone has a little better idea what it's about. So It Happened on Saturday is the story of a 13-year-old girl named Julia who meets someone online who isn't who he says he is, and she escapes from a very dangerous situation. She nearly becomes a victim of human trafficking, and she has to find the courage and the strength within herself to share what happened with her peers, because they think that, oh, she met this great guy online and then it didn't work out because her mom found out. That's what they think. But in fact, she had this experience that was really terrifying and traumatic for her. She did escape very quickly, but she realized what could have happened to her. And it was a real wake-up call. And it was something that she really had to then recover from. And she just wanted so badly to belong and to be accepted by this group of girls at school. And she just thought, if they find out what really happened, they're going to think, oh, how did you fall for that? Why were you telling us all this? So she just really has to figure out who she's going to be authentically and what kind of person she wants to be. So that's some background about it. As far as the aspects of getting the message out about social media safety and about human trafficking. I wrote this book after I had gotten very involved in volunteering with child trafficking survivors in Houston, where I currently live. I had taught in Virginia for a long time, and I found out about human trafficking because I was flipping channels one night and I saw a movie that showed kids hardly older than my students being shoved into a van and screamed at and just treated horribly. And I didn't know what it was, and I just stayed up really late on a school night watching because I just couldn't turn it off because I had to figure out what this was. And when I found out that it was based on a true story and this was actually happening all over our country, all over the world, I just really wanted to get involved in the fight. And that's when my husband was transferred to Houston, and instead of going back to full-time teaching, I wanted to get involved with anti-trafficking groups. Which is what I did. And as I realized from my teaching, I had not found any books that really address this for kids, because we think of it as a subject that, oh, this is too scary, we can't tell kids about this. But my challenge was then, let me find a way to write a book that won't be too scary, it will be age appropriate. And as I tell the students I talk with in these presentations, I want you to be savvy and I want you to be aware so that you can be safe. They don't need to be afraid. They don't need to know all the details. They just need to know that there are people called traffickers, people called recruiters who are out there who are looking for them on social media. They're looking for people who aren't going to know. So they need to know the signs. They need to know what to look out for and how they can be safe, both on social media and just in the world. As far as the reception, I have been getting a lot of school visits where they for middle school age, where I'm asked to speak about these things. And one school in Connecticut contacted me and said, we heard about your book, and can you do a trafficking presentation, just talk to the kids at the right level, just the age appropriate level, but about all this and about social media safety, because we have a grant to talk to the kids about this. So I know that there are groups out there trying to get this message to kids, and connecting with them is something I'm happy that happened. And I hope there's more of that, because I think that if kids can be aware, they can stay safe. So I do feel like the reception has been really good. I'm also I was in Virginia just yesterday speaking to a group of high school students. I am finding that even though the book is middle grade, and it's really, the publisher has it as 10 to 14, grades 5 through 9, I am finding that because of the subject matter, there seems to be some interest in just people who want to know about this topic, because there's just so little out there about it, and especially with the social media connection. So I have been finding some speaking events and things with the older teens as well. So I think that's pretty much sums it up.
Family is a huge and important component in Jude Saves the World. I love what you were saying earlier with the reader and his mom and stuff like that. So I wanted to know, for readers who haven't read your book, from that perspective, can you talk about Jude's relationship to their family? And also, I really also love that Jude Saves the World touches upon found family and allies and sort of the incredible relationships that we can have as well. So I'd love to know about that.
Yeah, so in Jude Saves the World, Jude has a single mother who really is just doing her best to protect Jude. They have a harder relationship with their grandparents because their grandparents don't know that they're non-binary, and sort of on page, like, dead name and misgender Jude, but we never find out their assigned gender at birth or their dead name. And so Jude just has a really hard relationship with them because they're, as Jude says, stuck in the Stone Ages, and just basically very, it's a very gendered relationship. Like, gender roles are play a very strong role in their relationship. And so I would say that Jude probably, you know, at the very beginning of the book, is very like angry also at their mom because she's trying to protect Jude. So she's trying to say, like, you know, don't come out to them because they're not going to understand. And, you know, in her way, that's how she's protecting Jude. But that's not always the best way to protect somebody, because even if it's hard, I know for myself, like personally, even though it was hard, like coming out was such a relief at the same time. And so I think that was something that I really wanted to write about, is just like, yes, it's going to be a little bit harder. Yes, there's going to be a lot of, you know, hate and bad things in the world that happen. But there's also like so much relief in coming out. And I think that was something that was really important to me, and to show, like, you know, how family can be trying to protect you, but at the same time hurting you without meaning to. And then with the found family and the allies, honestly, found family is like one of my favorite tropes in books or TV shows or movies. I think it's a very queer thing as well. I feel like queer people love their found families. They just finding family that really understands you and gets you on like a level that, like, you know, other people can't, I think is very important, and just building like that kind of community. And I think that for Jude, there was like a craving for having that kind of found family and creating that community, because they didn't really feel safe or have it within their own family. So, you know, they build up their friendships and they expand their community and basically create their own little family. And I think that was important for me, because not only do I just love it, so it was a little self-indulgent, but it was important because I think that is very true to the queer experience.
And then for Skating on Mars, one of the pieces that I loved so much about Skating on Mars was that for Mars having a competition where they're seen for their skills regardless of gender and gender binaries creates a space where everyone is celebrated for their talents and for their capabilities. And I thought that was really one of the sort of beautiful pieces about Skating on Mars. I wanted to know, how much of the story did you know before drafting, and like how much of the characters did you know before you started drafting?
So good questions. And I will say that, like, my process as a writer has really evolved since, and maybe because of Skating on Mars, but I do a lot of holding ideas in my head and trying to see, like, you know, if I put these things together, is there something interesting there? So with Skating on Mars, the ideas that came together were this exploration of gender, an exploration of grief, and then looking at competitive figure skating, which are all things that are personally interesting to me, but I don't know that they necessarily all go together naturally. It's like, you know, I think of figure skating, I think of dead dads, end of, you know, right away, quick association. But I think, like, for me, having three ideas, and it's like that, you know, we think about a triangle having this really solid foundation, but being able to play with these different connecting points uh, allows me to come up with enough tension, interest. What about this thing over here? Actually, this conflict is part of it, but I need, like, you know, the third heat, as it were. So I had like a very loose outline of where the story was going, but I tend to really get to know my characters pretty fast, and then we go where they say we're going to go. So sometimes, I'll be writing and I'll be writing an interaction, and one of my characters will respond to that interaction, and I'm like, that wasn't what we had planned. We talked about this in advance. And Mars is like, no, I'm gonna, I'm gonna take care of this. I'm gonna take care of business right now. I think the other thing is a certain amount of research goes into everything that you write, hopefully, just because you're pulling in, like, I want to be authentic to experiences and to reality, but also I am writing fiction. So I was talking to someone, and sadly, I know that like the competition that Mars ends up creating at the end of this book isn't something that really would happen. But it can happen in my book. And it can also, I think, to your point, really shows like there are other avenues into existence than what is and what the rules state. So I think it's a little tricky when you're balancing that realist, and we're all doing this in all of our books, is there's a realistic component, but there is a fictional component. So I think for me, having that open competition, this is a spoiler, I guess. There's an open competition at the end. Sorry, everybody. It is a heartwarming sports book. What can I tell you? But I think I also am trying to negotiate a world where change is really slow, especially when it comes to rights related to trans folks. Particularly in this moment, it feels very painful and slow. So I think on the one hand, I wanted to create a space that has hope and plants the seeds for change, and certainly empowers young people to see, I can do something. I think all of, Sydney was talking about empowering young people to be savvy and to be able to be safe and take care of themselves. Ronnie's talking about, how do you form your own family? I think for Mars, being able to take a step forward, even if it feels small and clumsy, is really important. And I hope that that message comes across to readers as well.
Yeah, sorry about the framing of that question. Obviously, also made it very spoiler related too.
That's okay. There are other fun moments of like, oh, I didn't know that was coming. So like, you should still read the book.
Yeah,
just because you know that happens, you should still read it. It's still good.
Yes, definitely. As you said, it's only part of the triangle. Definitely. But it also is a great segue to the next question that I wanted to ask, which is about, I love that what I love or what piece of what I love about middle grade stories is the way that they give younger readers specifically a voice. I think that middle grade is like, I think YA gets like a lot of attention for, emotions and angst and whatever, but I feel like middle grade is when a lot of really important, kind of really scary conversations are happening with friendship, with about who you are, your place in a social dynamic, all of these different things. And so middle grade stories that focus on giving those readers a voice when they feel like so much can start to come out of their control and be disenfranchised, I think is so important. Um, what do you wish you I realized I went off topic in that question, but what do you wish you were told when you were younger, so like as a middle grade person, and do you want to comment on the importance of middle grade stories and giving middle grade readers and characters a voice as a theme in your work? So Caroline, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, like, just having the language to understand the spectrum of existence is something I wish I had, but I also recognize, like, I grew up when I grew up. I didn't have the word non-binary in middle school. I didn't understand, that sort of the spectrum of queerness that exists. So I didn't know how to access that for my own identity, for my friends around me. So I'm really thankful that there are more stories now that allow young people space to explore those things. I think too, like, it's what's so tricky about middle grade and like about middle school, about being that age, is it's when young people are really developing agency, like they have some control over their lives, and at the same time so much is out of their control. It's like, yeah, I can pick my friend, I can pick my friends, except if I do this, I see that this will happen and this will happen, and also I have hair growing out of everywhere. Like, what am I supposed to do? The world is crazy. So I think having access to different kinds of stories, lots of kinds of stories. And I would also say, like, for me personally, it was just such this like moment of relief to be able to access language about myself. And at the same time, to like the next step beyond that is to realize, like, okay, but like, yes, I'm non-binary, but that also doesn't mean one thing. It doesn't look one way. And it's okay if your existence doesn't fit in this very specific way that the world seems to want it to exist. But that's so hard when you're in middle school and upper elementary school, because like your whole job is like, but how can I fit in? How can I exist in the way that the people around me want me to exist? So like, I would just say exist in your way, and also read my book, please.
I just want to echo everything you just said. That was just so well put and exactly how I would have answered that question. I think it's so hard when you're young. Like everything is so big and emotional, and I think that something I wish I had been told when I was younger was just that, like, it's going, like, honestly, it's going to get better. Like, whatever you're feeling right now, like, this will get better. It will pass. And you will be able to, process things and move on and discover more about yourself. And I think that I really wish I had had that person to be able to say, like, all of your feelings right now, like, they matter and they're valid, but it's just going to get better. So yeah.
So I would say a big theme of my book for Julia is really being her true authentic self and just not being afraid to take a stand and do something that seems really scary and seems really hard, but that she knows is the right thing to do. And she knows it's just so important, to be able to tell the truth to these kids, even though she's afraid she's potentially going to lose everything if she does what she knows in her heart is the right thing to do. And that's her journey in the second half of the story after she has, this is again a bit of a spoiler, but since you already know what the story's about, I guess it's okay. She joins a group that is for kids who have been through traumatic experiences, all different things. She's the one, who narrowly escaped becoming trafficked, but other kids have been through natural disasters or violent situations or any of the many different things that kids are going through that they experience and really need to learn and get support, I think, in working through a traumatic event. And so I think that's where she learns that it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to show your vulnerability and let other people know that you might need them, and you can be there for them as well, but you don't always have to put on that brave face of I've got it under control, I'm great, everything's fine, which is what she tries to do when she first goes back to school and quickly learns it's just not that simple. You can't just wish something into existence, and you have to do the work. So the mental health component, I think, is something that is a really big part of the story that I actually hadn't thought about when I was first writing it. And it just came when someone said, well, what happened to her afterwards? What was this effect on her and on her friends and on her family? And at the time when I was writing that, I was receiving training in trauma informed counseling through the group Traffic 911 that I was working with, and I had gone to these sessions with some really wonderful teaching and instruction that was to work with these, to help me when working with the trafficking survivors. And I'm so glad I got all of that information, but I found that it also really informed my writing, because I was then able to use some of that in the second part of the book. So circling back to what I would have told my younger self, I think as a kid, those messages that sometimes some really bad things happen and you do put on that brave face and you do just kind of pretend everything is okay, but that it is okay not to be okay. And it is okay to let people know that you aren't okay, and let them be there for you, and you can be there for them. I think that's the message I would have told my younger self.
Friendship is a theme, I think, in all of your books, and also as we've kind of talked about in the middle grade age space, is a very pertinent theme as well for these readers. I would love to know if you could talk about what friendship means to your main character. Ronnie, do you want to start?
Sure. So friendship means like everything to Jude. It is like probably the number one priority for Jude. Their relationship with Dallas is something that I really wanted to show, because I just really wanted to show like what a healthy relationship could be between, friends. And I really wanted to show that it's like okay to say like I love you to your friends. Like that is, something that is healthy, and like letting people know that you care about them is just really important. And I think that when they introduce Stevie and make their duo into a trio, Stevie becomes like such a huge friend to Jude, and to the point where like I was re-listening to my audiobook, and I realized like Jude is like so concerned with Stevie and like Stevie's well-being, to the point that I was kind of like, oh, like maybe that was a little bit too much. But I still think that that's just who Jude is. They just give their all to these friends. And yeah, so I think that for Jude, friendship is everything. I think for Stevie, who was coming out of like a toxic friendship, she would say that friendship is, complicated and messy, and really becoming friends with Jude and Dallas kind of teaches her what a healthier friendship looks like. And I think Dallas, for him, it would be that he just needs Jude, because Jude is like, he has like 5 sisters. So Jude is kind of his way of having a break from his family and like being able to be his own person.
So I would say that as far as friendship with Julia, the story begins after she had been in a group of 4 girls who had been hanging around together for a while. And 2 of them were twins, and their mom had gotten transferred for work. So they had just left at the end of 7th grade. The book begins right before 8th grade is about to start. And the other person who had been in their group of 4 is a girl named Nori. And she and Julia had been very close for a long time. But Nori was at an art camp with no technology all summer. And so she and Julia hadn't been able to communicate in a long time. And Nori comes back from the camp with a lot of news. One is that her parents are getting divorced. And so Julia is really, really feeling some empathy for her, and really sorry that that's going on. But then the other bit of news is that she met a boy at the camp who, of course, has to go to their school. Julia's like, of course he has to go to our school. And And so now she's worried about where does that leave her with the other friends gone across the country, and then Nori now very preoccupied with this boy Luke. So the friendship issue is something that puts her in a vulnerable position. She had also experienced some pretty intense bullying a few years before that in fifth grade, and really does not want something like that to happen again. Does not want to be left out the way that she had been in the past, and so she's, I think, especially concerned about what's going on. And so I think it's the friendship situation that makes her so vulnerable to this person online who seems really nice, but who she does in some way know she should not be talking to. And then as the story goes on and she meets these other girls and actually becomes pretty good friends with them, that's why it's so hard for her when she has to tell them what's actually gone on and what's really happened, because she's so afraid of completely losing face with them and completely losing this new group of friends that have quickly become very important to her. And she and Nori do end up circling back to each other, and they do end up realizing how important their bond is and how important their friendship is. And I think they both grow a lot in their understanding about what it means to be a true friend, that if they had just told each other and been able to be really open and honest and vulnerable with each other from the beginning, then they may not have had the miscommunication that led to them kind of having this little falling out. But I think it takes some experience and some growing up on both their parts to put themselves in each other's shoes. But they are able to do that and really talk it out before the end of the book. So I feel like Julia got left in a good place.
In Skating on Mars, Mars's best friend is a year older than them. So they're in 7th grade. Their best friend is named Libby, and she's in 8th grade. And they figure skate together, which is how they know each other, but also have clearly spent many, many, many sleepovers, all these kinds of things. Libby is the first person that Mars comes out to as non-binary, and is very supportive of Mars. But Mars also lives in this sort of constant fear that as someone who's a little older than them, Libby might outgrow them. Or might want to hang out with other people or hang out with other people more, or, and that wants to, loves their friend and wants them to be happy, but also is really struggling with like, I don't actually really like your 8th grade friends and I don't really want to be around them, but I want to be around you. So what does that mean for me? And then I will say that the friendship, there are some moments when people mess up in this friendship, and it goes bad. But I also think for me, what was really important and what continues to be important as I write books for the middle grade age group is like, friendship is so messy. It's so deeply important. And it's so complex, and things can shift a lot in a short amount of time, or a little in a long amount of time. So I think for me, exploring sort of, in some ways, Libby starts as this anchor, and then Mars loses that a little in this book. And then sort of how do you forgive a friend? How do you tell a friend when something is not okay, when something doesn't feel good? And it was actually something, shout out to my editor, because Mars really quickly forgave Libby for this moment. And my editor was like, I don't think so. I don't think so. First of all, I don't think Mars would be on board with just forgiving Libby, but also like, it really wasn't okay. Like, I'm an adult and it wasn't okay. So, it was still important to me that we see some of that repair happen. But it also, I think that messiness is critical. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a school administrator about my second book, and I was describing the plot to her. And at one point she turns to me and she goes, wow, middle schoolers just cannot help hurting each other. And I was like, well, to be fair, that's like the whole point of books is like people hurting each other and then repairing it. But I do think too, that's like sort of just a natural truth about that age group. Also, everybody can't help it sometimes. So trying to find lots of blueprints through relationships.
My next question is if you could share some of your other favorite middle grade reads. Sydney, do you want to start?
Sure. So we're all in a debut group with other middle grade authors who have books coming out. So I thought it would be fun just to share a couple of the ones that I've read just most recently. It's just so much fun getting to read all these new books that are freshly out in the world or will be coming soon. The one I actually read an arc of last night on the plane, and it was so amazing. I adored it. It's called I Am Kavi. It's by Thushanthi Panwera, and it's about a girl growing up during the war in Sri Lanka, and it's done in verse. And every single word was just beautiful and just seemed like exactly the right word in every single one of the poems. So I just wanted to say that one was phenomenal. And one I read recently before that is called We the Future. It's by Cliff Lewis. And it's a really, really cool book about empowering young people, how they can really get involved and help save the earth. And it's just really cool because it's got a speculative element to it, but if you liked Back to the Future, you will love this book. It's got that time travel, people coming back from the future to tell people now we can't let this happen. And I just found it really fast paced and really witty, and just the writing was phenomenal. So that's another one. Those two are very different from each other, but I would say both so important and both so well done. So those are the ones that come to my mind today.
I'll do three. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my fellow non-binary figure skating middle grade novel, which is called Anna on the Edge by AJ Sass. Different books, but if you're into non-binary figure skating characters, like go for it. I'll also bring up Dear Mothman by Robin Gao, which came out, I think, in March. Is written in verse and is about a young person dealing with grief by writing letters to Mothman, the giant sentient moth, and is just really beautiful. And then the third book I'm going to bring up is at my child's request, which is the Witchling series by Claribel Ortega. She picked up this book when it came out originally, and we've it's the read together in bed book. And she was so thrilled when the second one, the Golden Frog Games, just came out. And we actually went to the bookstore and there happened to be the pre-order goodies available. And my child was like, what? There's merch. So I just, if you have a, 7-year-old child who's looking for some magical witch books, I say Witchlings.
My recommendation, and probably my most recent middle grade read, is The Song of Us by Kate Festner. Very beautifully written. It's also a novel in verse. So like Sydney was saying, every word just feels like it has its place there. It does have a sad ending, but I think the journey is worth it.
Thank you so much to everyone watching, and also to my amazing panelists. I've left the book, is it bookshop.org? I've left the book links in the description box below. So definitely make sure to pre-order Caroline's book and also pick up Sydney and Roddy's book as well in the few days, obviously, before it releases.
You can get it after those few days too. Like it'll still be around. As I said in the beginning, it's a long journey, this publishing thing.
And what I love as well is like the evergreenness, or I'm not actually sure what you call it, but like the lifespan of the book that just like continues to grow. I'm sure that Sydney and Ronnie know what I'm talking about. Thank you so much, obviously, to everyone and the authors, and I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.